The Testament of Cresseid by Robert Henryson. This is pretty much a continuation of the story between Troilus and Cressida right after the Trojan War. Cressida eventually betrays Troilus for another man named Diomed, but that same man, Diomed, eventually leaves her. So because Diomed leaves her, she pretty much curses the gods, specifically Cupid and Venus, because of what happened to her. She blames them for what has happened to her with her love story, with her love life. So, in this story, she's presented as somebody that's deserving of punishment, yet she is someone who should receive sympathy. So let's start with her deserving punishment. So she's someone who deserves punishment, pretty much as portrayed in the story. We can see from line 63 at the end of the ballad, Henryson writes, "Worthy women, in this short ballad made for your praise and instruction, for charity's sake, I admonish and exhort you not to mix your love with deception. Remember the end of fair Cresseid. Since she is dead, I will say nothing more of her." The author pretty much gives his intention for writing this ballad at the end, like with that line 63. He says that the whole ballad was written for their instruction, for the women's instruction, to pretty much not to have deceptive love, but to remember what happened to Cresseid. He pretty much in this reveals his intention in this line, and implying that her punishment is just because of her deceptive love. She eventually becomes a leper and dies. It's that is implied, that her punishment is just based on the line. The author writes this. He pretty much writes this line at the end, pretty much showing his intent that women should pay careful attention to what happened to Cresseid, and to not follow her lifestyle and her way of deceptive love. So he pretty much uses her as an example of what not to do, and this pretty much implies that what happened to her was just in his eyes, and that she was deserving of punishment because he uses her as an example for other women not to follow. And he doesn't mention that that it wasn't unfair that she was treated that way with her sentence from the gods, but he implies that this is pretty much a just thing that the gods did to her on her punishment. But at the same time, he paints the picture of her as worthy of sympathy. So the first quote I'm going to draw from that is line 15. In this quote, the gods were speaking together, like they pretty much decided to have Saturn deal out the judgment. He is described as acting like a noisy troll with an austere cheer. The judge who was dealing out her sentence was Saturn. It's pretty much inclined to a bad mood, and therefore would be too severe in his punishment. The reality of a judge in a bad mood shows that she is deserving of sympathy, because the judge who was dealing out her punishment was pretty much, he had an austere cheer, and he was in bad mood pretty much all the time. And the author likely wanted to put this description of Saturn to show that the one dealing out her punishment was probably going to be unfair and grumpy, and which would result in a punishment that was too severe, drawing sympathy from the readers. So because of his description of Saturn, it pretty much shows the readers that her punishment was probably too severe, and that she was somebody that was worthy of sympathy. And then another quote that shows that she is deserving of sympathy is from line 63. After Cresseid dies, we see Troilus respond to it by, when Troilus heard of her infirmity, her wail and lamentation, how she died in poverty, his heart was ready to break, and he fainted from the woe and sorrow that he felt. The author pretty much says that he was very heartbroken after hearing of her passing, and but instead of being angry and bitter, he mourns for her and her last state of life. He could have been mad and still bitter about what happened. I'm sure he was still mad, but like he was very sorrowful about what happened. Um, if someone like Troilus, who loved her so much, and Cresseid betrayed her, if he was able to mourn for Cresseid, how much more should the readers be able to pretty much mourn for Cresseid? I think this is intentional, and the author showing Troilus's response that if he was able to sympathize with Cresseid, then we should also be able to sympathize with Cresseid, because he's the one who should be very angry at her, yet he mourns for her. And pretty much the author paints a picture of Cresseid as somebody that we should be able to sympathize with, even though she made horrible mistake in her deceptive love. Here we see through the author's last line that she is deserving of punishment. So that last line, the first quote I mentioned, I think that was line 63, I believe. He shows that she's deserving. That the author shows that she's deserving of punishment by painting her as an example of what not to do. Yeah, at the same time, he shows that she is worthy of sympathy based on how Troilus responds to her. He could have been angry at her, yet he responds to her with mourning, and so pretty much shows that this shouldn't cause us to demonize someone who performed a bad deed, since we're also capable of doing the same thing if opportunity and resource presents itself. As far as how medieval readers and modern readers might interpret Cresseid differently. For medieval readers, as a medieval reader, if I was putting myself in the shoe, I probably would not have that much sympathy for Cresseid, because number one, I would have, as a guy in the Middle Ages, I probably would have double standards against women. I would probably paint Cresseid as somebody that was worthy of punishment from Saturn, because she was a woman and she should know better, pretty much. And whereas guys would probably get away with those type of things, like we see with Diomed. Even though he acted in deceptive love towards Cresseid, yeah, he still got away with it. But for modern readers, I believe we are more we treat women a lot better these days than they did back then, and we pretty much value women more than they did back in the day, and we would see the unfairness of Diomed getting away with his deceptive love versus Cresseid not getting away with deceptive love. And as far as what the author wants us to learn about judgment, I'm going to talk about judgment and responsibility and redemption. Let's start with judgment. I think the author wants us to learn that we should put someone in charge of judgment that is fair, because Saturn definitely was pretty much an old grump, and to put a judge that was inclined to emotion, that was not fair. So I think the author wants us to learn that we should put someone as judge that is not inclined to emotion, and that would not be too severe, yet not too light in their sentence, but just fair. And we can see that Saturn was not fair, in my opinion, because he was an old grumpy dude and was inclined to emotion. As far as responsibility, I believe that the author wants us to learn that Cresseid, pretty much she was blaming the gods, and that's why she was punished. And she was her blame shifting pretty much is what resulted in her judgment. And I'm curious, like in my mind, as I was reading this, like, would she not have been judged had she not blasphemed the gods and blame shifted? Like, maybe she would not have been judged because of that. But that's just something on the side. As far as redemption, at the end, Cresseid is very repentant and wants to show that she is sorry by returning to Troilus, his token of love. So there is a redemptive side of this where she ends up seeing her mistakes and blames herself instead of the gods. And but unfortunately, this doesn't overturn her sentence, which is sad. I think it should have overturned her sentence, and she could have gotten back to normal. Maybe gotten back with Troilus as her lover, because she repented. But even with her repentant state, she was still subject to her judgment, and she ended up dying, unfortunately. So this is a tragedy.